Okay, thank you. All right, I'm obviously not the most technologically inclined. So our program goals are, first, we are trying to help sustain and develop influenza vaccine production capacity at the national level for all of our individual countries and grantees. We are working to assist with obtaining the investments necessary for commercial scale production so that individual countries could become regional suppliers. And we are hoping to achieve sustainable influenza vaccine production capacity worldwide. ASPR BARDA is uniquely positioned to lead an effort to build sustainable influenza vaccine production capacity worldwide. We have technical and contractual expertise, defined relationships with multinational pharmaceutical companies, and developed relationships with our nonprofit and international partners like WHO. Our first long-standing cooperative agreement is with the World Health Organization. We have supported them from FY06 through 2009 with a total of $28 million, which they have subgranted to 10 countries around the world. Our main goal with this funding is to address the specific needs for pilot-scale influenza vaccine production facilities and preparing countries for eventual commercial-scale production. As you can see, there's a paragraph below which describes some of the specific uses of the funding, and Dr. Laszlo Palkonyay will present later in more detail. Our second cooperative agreement was initiated this year with PATH, an international nonprofit organization, and that was $7.9 million, which will be used for influenza vaccine production capacity and the production of clinical trial materials in Vietnam, which will be used for phase 1 and 2 safety and immunogenicity studies. And Dr. Rick Bright will present in more detail on that. In addition to our influenza vaccine production capacity efforts, we're also doing some international capacity building with rapid diagnostics, and this is in conjunction with our NIH and CDC partners who are supporting a clinical trial for antivirals. And Dr. Abdullah Brooks, sitting over in the front, is one of the recipients of this cooperative agreement. Just to give you a bit of history of our program, in FY 2005, Dr. Robinson and Dr. Gellin were able to obtain $1 million of ASPR funding, which went to Vabiotech in Vietnam. Starting in FY06, they were able to obtain $10 million from an emergency supplemental pot of funding that was mainly being used for domestic initiatives, and that funding was given to WHO, which then subgranted it to 6 initial grantees. In FY07, we requested annual funding and were denied. However, in FY08, we were finally able to obtain that funding, and WHO gave it to the 6 original grantees as well as 4 new ones. And in FY09, we made $3.6 million available through WHO for the Institute for Experimental Medicine in Russia, which is doing the live attenuated work. And also, we have the $7.9 million for PATH, which I just mentioned, and the $3.5 million for the Rapid Diagnostics Program. One of the key things that we're trying to do with our program is figure out how we can best measure our progress, because in order to ensure a continued financial commitment and possibly an expanded one, we're going to have to show people what exactly it is that we've been doing and where we want to go and how much that's going to cost. In 2010, we have $11 million available, which we're hoping the discussion at this workshop can help us figure out how best to allocate. We're working to quantify and qualify our resource needs for the life of the project and working very closely with WHO through all of this. And one of the key questions for us is how we can also identify additional donors or investors. As you heard from the co-chairs at the beginning of the meeting, we had a core committee meeting in August, and that group tried to figure out exactly what it is that the International Influenza Program and BARDA needs to know in order to successfully build the sustainable influenza vaccine production capacity. Some of the things that we realized we must consider while also examining the technical issues, we have to figure out how we can incentivize and attract trained workforce to these different regions of the world, how we can have willingness and opportunity to transfer technologies from different companies. Also, we need to best verify and characterize the disease burden to ensure that we are building capacity for a disease that we need to be building it for. And of course, the regulatory authorities, because if we create capacity and there's no one to regulate the vaccine, it's not going to do us much good. So that's the reason that many of you have been invited here today. Another key to our program is sustainability. So as we build this capacity, we want to make sure that we have continued availability of resources, which includes funding and personnel. Additionally, we want to make sure that the technology platforms that we consider for entry into these countries are sustainable, something that they can sustain without outside funding in the long run. And finally, one of the most important factors that there's been a lot of discussion about is that without continued demand for seasonal influenza or the establishment of demand for seasonal influenza, we will never successfully maintain pandemic surge. With the new administration, there's been a significant outpouring of support for international development. So we've taken this to our advantage with our program, and we've seen that there's a real match for our policy objectives. There's a long-term development impact to what we're doing. There are gains for the national security strategy and health diplomacy initiatives of the U.S. government. There's a commitment to multilateral framing of issues, responsible and effective foreign development and investment, and there's development of healthcare distribution capability. Finally, just a bit on BARDA's forte is the technology toolbox. There will be a session after this that's going to discuss the available technologies and what might be used in developing and emerging economy countries. One of the things that BARDA would really like to see happen is the development of a technology toolbox of options that different countries could use for influenza vaccine development. And something that BARDA will be doing later in the year is hosting a workshop specifically focused on this technology toolbox. There are several other considerations that we need to think about when considering how we are going to build this capacity. There are outstanding questions that we're hoping this group will take into consideration through their deliberations over the next 3 days. And finally, in conclusion, what our program really hopes to get out of this workshop is guidance from the group as to whether or not a country should have certain resources at the beginning of an investment or a decision to invest, and whether or not they should be willing to make available their own resources to this program, and if so, how much, and whether or not there should be minimum requirements for investment. And finally, the outstanding question is, what is the best investment for our available funds? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think that we will follow with the presentations and wait until the end to have the questions. So at this moment I will invite Dr. Laszlo Palkonyay, who is the project officer of our HHS cooperative agreement with the World Health Organization, for having his presentation.
Thank you very much. The presentation will be a detailed presentation about the program, what you heard about it already. The Global Action Plan was mentioned. This is the framework which is used really to produce, to provide this support, and the support is really consists of supplying funds and providing technology transfer facilitation. Financial support to this program started 2006-07, came from the following organizations. A technical evaluation was carried out at the beginning of the program, and this document actually is part of the binder. Technologically, there are 4 technologies available at the moment in mainstream vaccine production, influenza vaccine production. Inactivated whole virion split and subunit vaccines, and the live attenuated vaccine approach. The difference is important that for live attenuated vaccines there is not only know-how but actual master seed virus is necessary for the production. The graph plots time against investment need, and it is quite obvious that the need for the time is relevant, starting 2 to 4 years up to 12 years, and the actual investment requirements also varies a lot. First round, 6 manufacturers received grants, and the second phase of the program, initial companies received support. And I would like to concentrate on the status of the program. In the case of Biopharma Indonesia, a seasonal vaccine was licensed as a result of the program, and the second phase, the company switched to full production instead of fill finish, and H1N1 lots actually were produced. In the case of Mexico, construction and engineering plans were finished and completed, and construction is initiated in a collaboration with Sanofi Pasteur. In the case of Butantan, Brazil, again collaboration with Sanofi Pasteur, initiation of clinical trials with H5N1 and H1N1 vaccines are imminent. India has a presentation. They have a very interesting dual approach. Basically, they have a surge capacity approach with the live attenuated vaccine, which has a higher yield, which means it could produce more unit of vaccines per time. And we have heard the results. Basically, they are in clinical trials now with the live attenuated H1N1 strain vaccine, and the next week they will start with the inactivated product. Thailand was mentioned before. They have a similar approach, and they initiated their trials before Christmas for H1N1 live attenuated vaccines, but they are working on split inactivated seasonal vaccine as well, and the pandemic situation and live attenuated vaccine use as a surge capacity. In the case of Vietnam, a newly built production unit is in the final validation stage now. This is a whole video approach with allomadjuvation. And now I am turning to the new companies. We divided them among different groups. One group could be considered as companies who are really improving their production capacity or reinitiating, reestablishing capacities. And in the case of Cantacuzino Institute, actually the pandemic H1N1 lot was already tested in adults, and the vaccine was approved by the local regulator, and it is on the domestic market, and pediatric trials are also planned for the near future as part of the program, grant program. In the case of Serbia, the Torlak Institute, there is a re-establishment procedure, and at the moment offers arrive for basic design and contracts from contractors. The other area is the Eastern Mediterranean area. It was mentioned before in Egypt and Iran. They are really starting to build up a capability for full production. In the case of Egypt, a collaboration agreement was established with the Netherlands Vaccine Institute, and in the case of the other institute, collaborations are under discussion, and some equipments were purchased. The last of the group, the 11th company, is the Green Cross Corporation in Korea. This is a large-scale producer. However, the large-scale production is just started very recently, and they were able to put H1N1 product on the market, which means they carried out the clinical trials. However, they are also working, just like Butantan and many other companies, H5N1, because we cannot forget about H5N1 under the umbrella of the present pandemic. The right side of the slide shows what type of technologies are used, and we can see that basically they are following the mainstream of vaccine production. Except two companies are interested in the LAI with the live attenuated influenza vaccine technology. This map is familiar from Dr. Keeney's presentation. It highlights the geographical questions, which is called Eastern European in a sense, and also the Sub-Saharan African geographic area. I don't spend much time on it because it was already discussed. Live attenuated technology. it is very interesting that when you deal with an inactivated product, basically what you know, what you need, it is know-how, and of course time, money, and talent. For live attenuated vaccine, you need something else. Of course, you need the know-how, the license to know-how. However, you have to secure, in our case, it was secured through a material transfer agreement, the actual virus. And the origin of this virus coming from the Institute of Experimental Medicine, St. Petersburg, Russia, and thanks to our work, it became available for developing country manufacturers. I just would like to call a short attention to the insert in the slide, which shows the theoretical differences between live and inactivated vaccine production versus time. During the program, especially at the beginning of the phase 1 of the program, major challenges were identified, which are really, it seemed to be difficult to find technology providers for each of the manufacturers. Actually, we did find three. In 3 occasions it was possible, and also the limited human resources at the manufacturers. So the technology hub idea was raised, and it would create a technology hub which would serve as a technology hub for providing training and technology to these companies. In your binder there is a paper which provides more background on this concept. Basically, this is a technology platform, a package, which means the technology is provided to the interested manufacturer, and also training. In our concept, the technology was whole virion vaccine technology, egg-based vaccine technology. However, it could be developed later into other direction. In summary, I would like to summarize the achievements, what we can claim for our program. First of all, 11 developing country manufacturers received a grant. 6 of them produced clinical lots of H1N1 vaccines. Many are in clinical trials. 2 vaccines are already licensed. And this activity is ongoing. A royalty-free license agreement was negotiated with the owners for the live attenuated influenza vaccine technology, and the sublicenses are already 3 sublicenses established. Dr. Kini mentioned in her presentation. 2 of them are within our program. The Technology Transfer and Training Center at the Netherlands Vaccines Institute in Bilthoven is now fully operational. They already established bilateral agreement with certain companies, and other agreements are pending. Vaxera and EVAC are the 2 companies who established such a contractual agreement. More information on this program will be heard from Dr. Hendrik's presentation later. In the very last slide, really is a message type slide, or what is the next step. In our opinion, it will be essential to sustain both technical and financial support for the new manufacturers until a registration is actually established for the vaccine. It is very important, and it goes hand in hand, that the national regulatory authorities should be involved in the process, and their capacity should be strengthened in order to allow reasonably fast approval of the product. And not only this, but it's very important to monitor and oversee the clinical trials which lead to this approval. And just repeating what Dr. Kini mentioned before, Sub-Saharan Africa and Eastern Europe is an area on the globe where at the moment no local production capacity exists. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Palkonyay. Now is the time to listen to the comments of Dr. Rick Bright, who is the Scientific Director, Influenza Vaccine Project Vaccine Development Global Program from PATH. Dr. Bright.
Thank you for allowing me to go just a little deeper on one of these programs. As you can tell, there's a lot of progress being made in a number of developing country manufacturers, and Vietnam is another one example. You heard from Serum Institute in India today. So I'm going to give you a brief overview. I'm not going to talk to you about PATH and introduce you to what PATH does for influenza vaccines because Dr. John Boslega will cover that. I'm also not going to give you details about our PATH involvement in Vietnam because Dr. Hong will give you a presentation on that tomorrow. So I will give you a brief overview of the influenza vaccine development activities happening in Vietnam, and then dive a little deeper, go a little deeper for specific development activities, introduce a new PATH BARDA cooperative agreement, and then discuss our next steps. Human vaccine development for influenza against H5N1 pandemic influenza has been a high priority in Vietnam for a number of years in response to the H5N1 outbreaks in country. It's been strongly supported by the governments of Vietnam, the United States, Japan, the World Health Organization, and other stakeholders. Also, there are 3 entities that were initially engaged in human influenza vaccine production in Vietnam against H5N1. They also established a surveillance system in 2005 to identify the prevalence and seasonality of influenza. And progress has been made towards identifying gaps and establishing the next steps to continue development towards eventual licensure of influenza vaccine. The entities that are developing vaccines in Vietnam, they have a general product profile that they're working under. There are 3 manufacturers. Each of them have been involved in manufacturing vaccines in Vietnam for a number of years, and 1 research institute. For H5N1, they were using reverse genetic H5N1 seed virus. They're all whole inactivated virions adjuvanted with alum, and they are all using differing substrates, interestingly enough. And because of the H1N1 pandemic outbreak in the last year, a major shift has occurred in country, as encouraged by the government, to focus on responding to the H1N1 pandemic in an effort to produce vaccine for people in Vietnam. One of the first companies that was supported by the Vietnam government and Ministry of Science and Technology, that's MOST, in 2005 and 2006, was Biotech. Biotech was supported to conduct research and development and preclinical studies. They also received an award from Department of Health and Human Services and CDC in the United States in 2008-2009 for pilot-scale production of their vaccine, equipment procurement, technical assistance, and conducting clinical studies, phase 1 and 2. Biotech is using a primary monkey kidney cell-based platform for their vaccine production. They did complete the production process and manufacture of H5N1 clinical lots. They showed immunogenicity in the animal models, and they have successfully conducted phase 1 and phase 2 clinical studies with H5N1. And one of their clinical studies with the 30 subjects, they evaluated 30 micrograms of the vaccine with alum in 2 doses, noted no severe adverse events, only mild local pain, and a seroconversion rate of HI titers greater than 40 and greater than 95% of those tested, and also cross-clade protection or seroconversion greater than 76% against the clade 1 or clade 2 influenza virus. As I mentioned before, all the efforts now have focused in H5N1 and also on exploring different cell substrates to perhaps shift away from the primary monkey kidney cell. And they will be using a similar process, however, that they developed with the H5N1 vaccine. The pilot capacity target at Biotech is little over 1 million doses per year, which is about 100,000 doses per month. And eventual plans for scale-up could go to as high as 20 million doses per year. Biotech has made a number of different vaccines through the years, so they are an established vaccine manufacturer in Vietnam, having Japanese encephalitis, hepatitis A, hepatitis B, and a number of vaccines. And then this is, I don't know if you can see that. This is a package of their influenza vaccine. And here's a picture of their facility and a recent visit that we made in October with the BARDA staff. IVAC is another company in Vietnam. They have received financial support from the government of Vietnam, the Minister of Health, and from the U.S. and Japanese governments through the WHO and BARDA. They received technical guidance from the WHO and the Netherlands Vaccine Institute from the technology hub that Laszlo just presented. They are using an embryonated chicken-based vaccine platform, and they were successful in producing more than 5 lots of H5N1 that met the WHO requirements for release in their pilot facility. And they completed their preclinical studies to show that their immunogenicity of the vaccine in animals, HI titers in mice are greater than 100%, and greater than 100% of the mice had HI titers greater than 40, and 77% of the mice, 100% of guinea pigs, and 96% of the chickens all had HI titers greater than 320. They are now focusing on H1N1 that will be produced in their new facility that's being built and supported by the BARDA funds and with support through WHO. And their full capacity is targeted to be between 1.5 to 3 million doses per year. Here is a picture of their H5N1 vaccine package. Here is a picture of their new facility that's being constructed. As Laszlo mentioned, it's in the validation stage. It's located on a farm not far from their headquarters. This is the facility that will have all of their production offices and quality control. And this is also the chicken house, the number of chicken houses being built on site to produce their own eggs for production. Again, the goal is the current capacity is targeting 500,000 doses per year and soon expanding to 1 million doses a year. A research institute has been around for a long time in Vietnam is the Institute Pasteur in Ho Chi Minh City. They have also received financial support from the Vietnam government, the Ministry of Health, for process development of their viral cell-based influenza vaccine. They completed their production process for H5N1 and also completed the preclinical stage to show immunogenicity in animals. Again, 10 microgram doses fully protected mice from a challenge. In the past, they have manufactured BCG vaccine. However, they do not currently manufacture any vaccine, and long-term plans for production of influenza vaccines are currently unclear and unsupported. A new entry with interest for influenza vaccine production is Polyvac. They have been around for a while, since 1994, primarily producing the oral polio vaccine and measles vaccine for Vietnam. They also have a monkey breeding center so they can acquire the primary monkey kidney cells that are used in some of the vaccines. There's a very new interest in influenza vaccine production, and it's mostly to address the H1N1 pandemic outbreak. They have received financial support from the Minister of Science and Technology in Vietnam for process development, and they plan to explore either MDCK cell or virocell production processes for influenza vaccines. Now, while they do manufacture some vaccines for Vietnam, the long-term plans for production of influenza vaccines are yet unclear and unsupported. So key issues for all of these companies, each of these companies and institutions, are the next steps are to complete the quality assessment of the facilities that are being used to produce the vaccines and the process being used to produce the vaccines to ensure that they are CGMP compliant. They also must face the technical challenge of scaling up the processes from pilot scale, and they are needing technical training and support to do this, and that is one of the benefits of working with the WHO and the Netherlands Vaccine Institute Technology Hub. They next will face the challenges of submitting their regulatory dossiers to the regulatory authorities for approval to conduct clinical studies. And a need in Vietnam is to clarify the regulatory process to conduct clinical evaluations and for eventual licensure. And Dr. Hong will give an overview of the process currently in place in Vietnam tomorrow. They also need to enhance the clinical infrastructure and facilities to conduct clinical studies. And Dr. Hong will also give an overview of this. There's also a need to enhance surveillance, understand the burden of illness, and policies for uptake and use of seasonal influenza vaccine, because, as we've heard a number of times in today's presentations, that without a sustainable model for producing seasonal influenza vaccine, it's going to be very difficult, if not impossible, to have surge capacity ready for pandemic influenza. Funding and technical support is critical for all of these companies and all of these technical challenges. Briefly, the Path BARDA Cooperative Agreement that Christina alluded to is a new program, is a 3-year program for $7.9 million, started in October 2009. Our primary goal is to collaborate with BARDA, the WHO, and other stakeholders that have been working very diligently to improve the capacity of vaccine manufacturing and production in Vietnam. Our first steps are to complete an evaluation of the current status of various development programs in Vietnam, also to ensure the completion of the GMP production of the clinical trials material, and then to conduct phase 1 and 2 clinical studies with the material produced in Vietnam. We also will work to identify activities to enhance the in-country capacity for all the manufacturers. This will include workshops on regulatory guidelines and strategies, enhancing the NRA, the National Regulatory Authority, processes, clinical pathways, and the vaccine usage, and perhaps even immunological assays to be conducted in Vietnam. The next steps for our cooperative agreement is to finalize the placement and development of our United States and Vietnam teams, get those in place, conduct a manufacturing readiness assessment that will occur over the next couple of months, also conduct clinical readiness assessments to identify the pathways and sites that would be used for clinical studies, identify the gaps in manufacturing and facility and GMP production, and develop a work plan to ensure GMP production of clinical trial material, and then begin planning process for the in-country workshops. In summary, there has been a tremendous amount of effort and progress made in Vietnam. Several approaches have been used to enhance influenza vaccine capacity and production, and this has happened because of, and probably only because of, strong support from the government of Vietnam, including the Ministry of Health, the Ministry of Science and Technology, but also because of strong alliances with the United States government and international stakeholders such as the World Health Organization. Financial support from the United States government and Japan through the BARDA program and through World Health Organization, the strong alliances and technical support from WHO and technical assistance from Netherlands Vaccine Institute, all of these need to come together to ensure success in building capacity in developing countries. And now the new PATH-BARDA cooperative agreement will build upon the success to ensure the production of GMP quality material so we can evaluate in the clinic, and then we will continued support and additional support is strongly needed to continue development, broaden to seasonal influenza vaccine production, and create models for sustainable vaccine production and use in Vietnam. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Wright, and thanks to all the lecturers for his very good compliance with the time. So we have enough time to hear your comments and questions regarding this very important aspect. So this is open to questions. Please present yourselves before starting the question. Yes?
Okay, my name is Maria Cortez. I work for Pan American Health Organization. And my question is for Dr. Palkonyay regarding these new manufacturers that you are supporting, WHO is supporting. I would like to know if you are encouraging them or requesting them when they have the products to be submitted for pre-qualification, or what is going to be the mechanisms that you will encourage them to follow for guarantee the quality of the products that are coming.
Yes, I mentioned the importance of the national regulatory agency, that the agencies that they are involved in the process, so they have to live up to this type of expectation. A pre-qualification program is obviously for EPI program and influenza, so not for every vaccine. The pre-qualification program is sought because in the contract what we had with all of the manufacturers is that theoretically if they would be able to produce pandemic vaccines, 10% of their production would be offered for the WHO purchase, not free necessary purchase. And under the circumstances, if something is sold to UN agencies, it needs pre-qualification. You cannot go around it. So in the long run, one should be considered. It doesn't necessarily mean that they cannot sell product without this system. It is a different issue, of course.
More questions? Yes.
Yeah, my name is Olga Jonas. I'm from the World Bank. And I have two questions. The first question is really to all three of you, or any one of you that would be able to give some information. Do we have information on the unit costs of production of these vaccines in developing countries? Is it, about the same level, or is it much more expensive to produce vaccines in developing countries than it is in developed countries? I mean, do we have any kind of data on this issue? And the second question is about the national regulatory authorities. Several of you have mentioned that it's important to strengthen the national regulatory authorities at the same time, or that there's some weakness there. Would it be possible to have an international process instead? Because I can see in many developing countries the capacity simply is not there, and it's going to be very difficult to establish it. Would it be possible to have a sort of a partnering with countries that have good regulatory authorities, or some international body that would assume those functions for the countries that cannot develop their regulatory authorities? Thank you.
Thank you. So we have two questions. One is related to the cost of every unit, and the second one is related to regulatory issues. So probably each of you want to make comments. So Laszlo, you start.
I will start with the second one, which is more general, and I have more knowledge of the area. These countries are very, very different. In certain countries, the regulatory agencies qualified that there will be presentation from regulatory colleagues, including Dr. David Wood, during the meeting. So it will be described. So this is obviously it already exists in certain cases. As far as our program is concerned, we include training of regulatory colleagues. Partly through we are organizing training courses, and they are participating. I haven't had a chance because of the time restraint to discuss this, but this is part of our program, and also we are in close collaboration with our regulatory unit at the WHO. In February, for example, our colleagues will organize such a training program. So this is certainly part of it. In a general level response to this issue of level of quality of the national regulatory agencies, I would turn the key to Dr. David Wood, and maybe we will have opportunity to discuss later.
Rick, do you want to make some comments?
I don't know if this is on.
It's working. It's working.
It is working. Okay, thank you. I certainly would encourage some unification of international regulatory processes for developing vaccines and licensure of vaccines, because it would simplify a lot of things for a lot of new countries and companies trying to develop their vaccines. As regarding the cost of producing vaccines in developing countries, there are a number of cost models. I don't have exact numbers. Dr. Suresh Yadav there, who was the president of the Developing Country Vaccine Manufacturing Network, could probably give you more details, but it has been shown time and time again that we can reduce the cost of vaccines by producing them in developing country manufacturers. And some of the cost models I've briefly reviewed for Vietnam, for example, it is much less expensive for them to produce their own influenza vaccine than it is to procure or to buy it from other countries. And so it would be a better model, cost-saving model, if they can produce their own vaccine compared to what they do have to pay for it, at least. I don't know if it's produced less, costs more or less to produce it in those other countries, but it is certainly less expensive to make your own.
Do you want to make some comments, Christina?
Oh, the only thing that I would have to add to that is on the regulatory side, we actually have at least 2 panels which are dedicated almost exclusively to that. So you'll hear both from FDA, who has an international program, as well as WHO and their pre-qualification. So we'll be hearing a lot more detail on that later today and tomorrow.
Thank you. Yes?
My name is Mohammed Rabia. I am the chairman of Vaxera company, which we have some information concerning the production of influenza vaccine. First of all, I would like to address my sincere thanks to the WHO for the support to have this project on ground now. In fact, we started the project of having this influenza vaccine this month, January 2010, by digging the land, because it's a brand new facility. We have a lot of facilities, but we are not in this field of influenza production. And secondly, I would like to ask my colleague, Ms. Christina Hartman, as you mentioned in your presentation that you have something like $11 million still not allocated. And for your information, we had $1.5 million from the USA, from the WHO, but the total cost of the project will go up to $25 million. So I'm asking you, what is the channel or what is the way that we can discuss this? Thank you.
Well, yeah, I think that is actually one of the biggest issues, and many of you may know that my previous role was actually as the budget analyst for the department on pan flu, so I'm very familiar with the resource needs that we have for this and other programs. And one of the things that we've talked about a lot is the amount of funding going into this program, and it is. I think it is substantial in terms of the program as a whole, but in terms of the actual need to bring all of these manufacturers to commercial scale, obviously it's barely a start. So I think one of the key things for this group to think about is where might we consider obtaining additional investment. The United States government, the Asian Development Bank, and the government of Japan have all been key donors in the past. But I know that there are other governments who might be willing to consider contributing to such a program. And I think one of the key things that we need to do that we've really been focused on lately is quantifying and qualifying our resource needs for the entire program. And we'd like to do that at the individual grantee level with Vaxera, for example, with each of the individual manufacturers, as well as for the program as a whole, which, our goal is to actually have worldwide capacity. So I think that's a key issue.
Yes, please.
Daniel Miller from HHS. I heard you mention, I think it was Rick, the investment by the government of Vietnam. Could you speak a little bit more about what that investment entails in terms of whether it's in kind, whether it's cash, whether it's because I think that that's another part of the equation. We tend to talk about the external partners. And I think we need to expand that discussion of what is absolutely needed on the part of host governments to invest in these processes and these enterprises in partnership with others.
Yes, I don't have the exact numbers, but it has been some in kind, but also some cash. So it has been financial support. It's certainly, I think, an essential component of building capacity in a new country is to have the commitment of the government. A lot of things need to happen, and especially in a country like Vietnam, where all of the companies are owned by the government. And so if the government doesn't want that company or that activity to occur, then it likely can prevent it from happening. And so in Vietnam, the government has fully committed in setting some milestones and activities, conducting workshops, bringing in international stakeholders so they can help to train the companies and then the people and the regulatory authority on developing the vaccines. But they have also made financial contributions to each of these entities, some of them Ministry of Health Department, some of them Ministry of Science and Technology. And so it has been more than just in-kind contribution. And it's a continued commitment. Without the continued commitment and the collaboration now with PATH and with the WHO and with BARDA, then again, it would not be as simple to do any activities, conduct any activities and build capacity in Vietnam.
Laszlo, please.
I just would like to make a comment in a general point of view. We like to call our grants what we are able to provide as seed grants. In many cases, government contribution is very, very substantial. Cash, In other cases, it's different, but again, it depends the size of the actual operation. The time was short to go into details, but the size of the actual operation is very, very important, and the needs accordingly are different. And in my experience, local government support exists, and in cases it is cash form and in the many other forms. So the whole program, I envision, provided something, a seed to grow, and this is definitely part of the program, in my own view.
Yes.
One other, just thinking about partnerships on the ground, talking about the investment by host governments, is I happen to know some of the answer to this question, but if you could expand on, in this equation also are public-private partnerships, technology transfer from private companies. Are there nibbles at establishing new partnerships between private entities and these public entities, multinational corporations with these startups in country? What do you see happening now, and how clear is the crystal ball in terms of predicting the ability of this to expand?
Let's start with multinationals. There are three examples. I refer to it. Obviously, multinational companies prefer one-on-one discussion, and it depends on size of the market. In the case of Mexico, for example, it is a huge market. The Mexican approach for immunization for influenza is equal with the US one. Obviously, it means a large market. It represents a sizable percentage of the Sanofi worldwide production. So this is obviously important. But again, without government, local support, it would not happen. But we learned during the phase one of the project that we needed some hub technical help also, and I am not an economist, it's not my field, but private partnership obviously are very, very important. This private and you know the terminology better than me. The private enterprise and the non-profit involvement and government involvement. I think the challenge of influenza in general really necessitates such a collaboration.
Yes, please.
This is a related question / comment. And it has to do really with evaluation of what's been done, and through the approach that is taken with that evaluation, making sure that you come up with, you come up with some figures that allow you to sell the program so that other governments will invest. And I think that if I remember correctly, prior to the emergence of pandemic H1N1, there had been some kind of an analysis made either by WHO or HHS, which indicated that the seed money that was provided tended to garner about tenfold greater funding from the government. And I think that if that, and it may have even been higher, it may have been 15-fold or 20-fold, but I think that is, if those numbers are correct or anywhere near in the ballpark, that is a great way to encourage other governments to actually invest in this, because it is a tremendous investment. So were those numbers a figment of my imagination, or was there some substance to them?
is not imagination at all. The figure you mentioned 10, 15 times contribution do exist. I don't go into the details, but do exist. And when you consider, let's say, by a ballpark figure, 1.5 million, I can say that in certain cases the contribution 10 times as much was in certain countries. That's absolute fact. In other cases, a little bit less than 10 times, but they exist. In certain cases, is less. But again, it depends on the size of the project, etc. But my response to this is a definitive yes, but I cannot say that in each case is, of course.
Okay, well, let me finish saying that we have been very lucky because we had an epidemic with a low mortality, relative low mortality. If we will have a higher mortality with this speed of production, we will be facing a catastrophe in the world, mostly in the developing countries. So we will have to increase the velocity of our processes to have very soon better production in all the regions of the world. I thank you very much, the presenters, and for the attention. Thank you.